इंडस्ट्रीज़ हैं और उनके जो स्पॉन्सर्स हैं, तो उनका एक सीजनल पैटर्न होता है इंडस्ट्रीज़ का। अभी टेक्सटाइल का सीज़न है, टेक्सटाइल की कॉटन में मतलब बहुत इस वक्त पैसा गया हुआ है। सिमिलरली शुगर का सेशन आता है इस वक्त, तो ये शुगर का भी सीजनल फैक्टर होता है, तो उसी शुगर के उसमें पैसा गया हुआ है इस वक्त। अच्छा, फिर इसके अलावा आपके एक और बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग चीज़ है, लास्ट ईयर जो बहुत बड़ा इन्फ्लो हमारे पास आया था अराउंड मार्च टू जून में, उसकी एक बुनियादी वजह ये भी थी कि आपको जब सारा जो डेवलपमेंट वर्क था, इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन था, वो स्टैंड स्टिल पे था। स्टैंड स्टिल की वजह से स्पॉन्सर्स के पास बहुत लिक्विडिटी मौजूद थी। अब ये हुआ है कि जब टर्फ फाइनेंसिंग लोगों ने ली है, तो टर्फ फाइनेंसिंग लेने की वजह से अब बहुत सारे लोग एक्सपेंशन में जा रहे हैं, और जब एक्सपेंशन में जा रहे हैं तो टर्फ इज़ बेसिकली यूज फॉर इम्पोर्ट ऑफ मशीनरी, बट बाकी जो उन्होंने इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर क्रिएट करना है, लोकल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर क्रिएट करना है, जो वर्किंग कैपिटल जनरेट करना है, तो वो पैसा वहाँ पे अब यूटिलाइज हो रहा है, तो वो पैसा निकला है। लेकिन एक चीज़ मैं इसमें ऐड कर दूँ कि कुछ हमारी एक डिलिब्रेट भी एक एफर्ट रही थी कि इस फंड को साइज चूँकि हमारा बहुत बड़ा हो गया था, तो हमने इसको ये किया कि थोड़ा डाइवर्सिफाई किया। हमने एक नया फंड लॉन्च कर दिया, मीज़ान डेडिकेटेड डेली इनकम प्लान, विच इज़ वेरी वेरी सिमिलर टू आवर मीज़ान रोज़ाना आमदनी फ़ंड। तो आप ये देखेंगे कि ये कुछ पैसा हमारा वहाँ से जो निकला है ना, वो इस फंड में भी आया है, बिकॉज इट गिव्स अस फ्रॉम अ डाइवर्सिफिकेशन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, इट गिव्स अस मोर कंट्रोल कि अगर वो फंड का साइज़ बहुत बड़ा हो जाता है ना, तो फिर हम प्रॉपर्ली उसको डाइवर्सिफाई भी नहीं कर पाते। तो इसलिए ये अब इस वक्त हमारा जो मीज़ान रोज़ाना मनी फंड है, इट इज़ अबाउट आई थिंक 42 बिलियन है, रफली अबाउट 42 बिलियन है, और जो डेली इनकम प्लान है जो कि अभी हमने लॉन्च किया है, वो 15 बिलियन है। As far as mix is concerned, so our mix is about 52% by individual investors, and actually I will further break it down into institutional, and there's a breakdown of that as well. So about 18% are retirement funds. So basically retirement funds अगर आप बात करते हैं तो वो यही बात होती है ना कि प्रोविडेंट फंड्स हैं, ये पेंशन फंड्स हैं, ये भी पैसा इनडायरेक्टली तो इंडिविजुअल्स का ही होता है, लेकिन वो यही होता है कि कंपनीज के थ्रू आता है हमारे पास, तो इसलिए वो क्लासीफाई इंस्टीट्यूशन में होता है। लेकिन अगर उसकी ट्रू स्प्रिट देखें तो वो भी इंडिविजुअल है। तो 52% डायरेक्टली इंडिविजुअल्स, 18% इंडिविजुअल थ्रू रिटायरमेंट फंड। तो ये हमारा मिक्स 70% है। 70% आउट ऑफ दी 100% इज थ्रू इंडिविजुअल इन्वेस्टर्स एंड अबाउट 30% इज इंस्टीट्यूशनल इन्वेस्टर। एईएम्स की बात कर रहा हूँ, एईएम्स की बात कर रहा हूँ। अच्छा, बट चूँकि और हमारा चूँकि फोकस हमेशा से इंडिविजुअल इन्वेस्टर्स या रिटेल पर रहा है, सो दैट इज़ वाई आवर मिक्स इज सो मच बेटर। अगर आप ओवरऑल इंडस्ट्री का एवरेज देखेंगे तो इंडस्ट्री का एवरेज इज अबाउट 30 to 35% इज इंडिविजुअल इन्वेस्टर्स एंड अबाउट 65% इज इंस्टीट्यूशनल इन्वेस्टर्स। So as far as the penetration of mutual fund in Pakistan, it is very, very low, and there are several reasons for it. And in fact, before we go into the reasons, I will just share some international comparison on that. So in terms of the total number of account holders in Pakistan in mutual fund, there are only 400,000 investors out of a population of 220 million. And when we are talking about this population, it means that only 0.2% of the people invest in mutual funds. On the other hand, if you look at the basically the bank accounts, so in terms of bank accounts, basically there are about 40 million bank accounts in Pakistan, and there are about close to 40 million accounts with the wallets. So the total number of accounts is close to 80 million. So just imagine that only 400,000 of those people are invested in mutual funds. If you look at very similar market, like for example India, although the population of India is very big, but still as a percentage of the population, if you look at the numbers, there are 118 million people in India who are invested in mutual funds. That's a huge proportion, and about 20% of those people who have a bank account are invested in mutual fund invested in mutual fund in India. If you go further to slightly more developed market like Malaysia, and certainly Malaysia, as we all know, is not a very old market, but it has also progressed very well, very quickly. So in terms of Malaysia, the population is 33 million, and out of those 22.4 million people have mutual fund accounts, which is 68% of the population. Now let's talk about what are the factors which are stopping it, and then I would divide it into two kind of factors. One is the non-controllable factors from the perspective of the mutual fund industry. So one of the factors is, for example, the disposable income of the people. Disposable income is low, so certainly people are saving less. The saving rate in Pakistan is about, individual saving rate is about 7%, overall saving rate is about 15%. If you look at the markets like India and Bangladesh, the saving rates are 30% plus. So they are between 30 to 34%. So practically we are saving less than half of what other similar economies are saving. That's one factor. Now certainly that has to do with the disposable income of the people. The other important factor, which is again to a very large extent I would say non-controllable, is the government's need for money. And the government is raising a lot of money through national saving schemes. And that's a huge amount of money. So because they are offering a higher rate of return compared to most types of mutual funds, certainly that money first goes to national saving schemes and then comes to the mutual funds. So these are the two external factors. And then there are a lot of controllable factors. And from the first controllable factors, I think there is a need to increase awareness. So for example, since mutual funds sizes are low in Pakistan, very small sizes, although the cost of doing business is very high, so the reach of the AMCs is very limited compared to the reach of the banks. Now we know on average banks have, well, mid to large size banks have a branch network of 1,000 to 3,000 branches. So certainly you can see that they are present everywhere, every nook and corner of every street of all cities, they are there. But as far as mutual funds are concerned, just to give you an idea, the total number of branches of mutual fund industry, collectively the entire industry, would be something like less than 100. So Al-Meezan, which is one of the largest branch network, we have 25 branches. So our reach is very limited. Now globally what happens is that the distribution is done through third parties and distribution is done through banks. Now certainly you can say that why this model is not being used in Pakistan, because the banks are there. So the problem is that again the banking spreads are so high compared to the fee that is charged by the mutual funds that banks would certainly prefer to take deposit in their own account and invest in the government paper. So the net interest margin, which has come down from 7% at one point in time to about 4.2% now. So in every rupee that the bank actually gets from deposit and invest in the government securities, they make a spread of 4.2%. On the other hand, the fee of a money market mutual fund is between 20 to 50 basis points. So certainly it makes more economic sense for the banks to focus on deposit rather than selling a third party mutual fund. And even if the AMC is a subsidiary of the bank, still the profit margin is more than 20 times of what they can make through a mutual fund. Now that is a very important factor. The other important factor is the ease of doing business from the perspective of the ease of investing, I would say, ease of investing for the retail investor. Now when a retail investor actually goes to a bank account and goes to a bank and opens a bank account, then certainly there are a lot of requirements to be fulfilled. Now, and obviously the bank also accepts cash, whereas the mutual funds don't accept cash, and the only channel to actually bring money into a mutual fund account is through the banking channel. Now the problem is that when a person wants to open an account with a mutual fund company or asset management company, there are additional paperwork and there are a lot of additional requirements which are actually demanded by AMCs because of the regulations. So that is then another area which needs to be looked at, and because of that what happens is that the potential investors say that when I went to the bank did not ask for this information, why are you asking me for this information? So there's a problem there. The other problem is, again, as I said, the reach. To counter the handicap of reach, one can go digital, and that is actually the way forward. I think is the right way to do. And recently in 2021 only, some different types of digital mutual fund accounts have been allowed by the regulators, and I personally feel that will be a good way to attract investors, because now there are about, I think, 60 million smartphones in Pakistan, and we have young population. 50% of our population is younger than 30 years. Certainly they don't have deep pockets to invest in mutual funds, but if we can reach out to those people and digitally open their account in a paperless environment, then certainly that will develop the saving habits as well and eventually increase the number of investors. As far as ETF is concerned, ETFs are basically certainly this is the in thing in global markets, and one of the reason is actually why the ETF emerged in the global market. The ETF emerged just to reduce the cost of investing, because the mutual fund, normal mutual funds, they have a higher fee compared to ETF. So that is why more and more investors globally are moving towards ETF, and the ETF market is growing at a very fast pace. Now come Pakistan, what are the challenges? Now, as I mentioned earlier, that mutual funds don't have a proper distribution channel. So because we don't have a proper distribution channel, then because remember one thing, in the developed worlds, ETFs are sold by the third party distributors, and those distributors are broker dealers and the banks. Now unfortunately both those distribution channels are not very active in Pakistan. So first of all, because these channels are not active, then certainly there is nobody actually to really promote ETF. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that ETFs work, the ETF market actually grows in more efficient markets, where actually the benefit of active investing or alpha generation is low. Now in Pakistan, because the markets are not that efficient, they are not so liquid, we see high level of volatility, so the possibility of generating alpha is much higher compared to the more efficient markets. The information flow is also slow. So because of that, you will always find, and if you look at the performance of the ETF which have come into the market as well so far, the performance of the active funds is generally higher than the passive funds. And because of this factor, the passive, because the ETF have a passive approach most of the time, so that market is not really picked up. So it is a function of both the performance and also the ability of the availability of the right distributors. Unless unless our market becomes more efficient and also broker dealers and banks actively promote ETF, I feel that this market will still be very, very slow. And we have already seen it in case of index funds as well. So just imagine, before the ETFs came globally, they were index funds, and index funds were doing, again, index funds are big in size globally, but in Pakistan you find only 2 or 3 index funds. Al-Meezan itself was one index fund, but we find that people prefer to invest in an active funds rather than in passive funds. जब ये जी Islamic funds, when the Islamic funds were launched, there was a lot of, initially there were people had a concern that whether they will be able to deploy the money or not. But I have seen that alhamdulillah, when the Islamic institutions developed, Islamic funds developed, Islamic banks developed, and their size grew, so we also worked at the same time with the regulator on the development of the markets as well, on the availability of instruments as well. So while there are, at times there are challenges when the government is not issuing sukuk, then there is always a challenge. But now I think in the recent past what has happened is that the government launched energy sukuk, then the government has been regularly issuing the GOP Jara sukuk. So because of that, that problem is not so acute now as compared to what it used to be, and because of that I don't think it's a major bottleneck, and that is the reason that we have been able to kind of increase our allocation mix of investors. Like as I mentioned earlier, that about 65% of our money is actually in the fixed income funds compared to compared to the equity funds. So इतना बड़ा issue नहीं रहा है अभी. At one point in time it used to be a major issue, and that is why there were no Islamic income funds until we launched our first one in 2007. This is a very interesting question about a new player coming into the mutual fund industry, asset management company, Pak Qatar Takaful. I think, in my personal opinion, it is always good to have more players, because it makes the size of the pie bigger. I think right now the size of the mutual fund industry, as I said, just 400,000 account holders. It is so small that mutual funds are not competing against each other. they are actually competing with the other sectors of the capital market. They are competing against the bank deposit, they are competing against the national saving, and they need to work collectively to increase the size of the pie. That is our focus is right now, because we can very easily take this 400,000 account holders to 4 million account holders. So the more new players come in and they bring a new kind of products, I think it's good for the industry. We have had a consolidation industry. The number of asset management companies has actually come down to 18, 19, of which about 18 or 19 are active at the moment. I think total number is at 19 right now. So I think there's room for more players, and it is good that they come in and they bring new products. Collectively, the industry needs to work on increasing the number of investors.